What's up, guys? Welcome back to Darth Matu's Holocron. Today, we are returning to the world of Star Wars Legends with a deep dive back into Darth Matu's Armory. We're finally going to be looking at light weapons, the most famous of which is the lightsaber, their origin, their development, their history. I feel like there aren't enough in-depth looks at this sort of thing, so we're going to get in as deep as we can. If you guys enjoy this sort of thing, please like and subscribe. It really does help a ton. And without further ado, let's get into it. The first light weapons were not truly light weapons at all. These are the Force Sabers, used by the Rakatan Infinite Empire in order to enforce their despotic rule across the stars over 25,000 years before the rise of the Galactic Republic. Force Sabers utilize the Force directly, like most of Rakatan tech, specifically the dark side of the Force. The user would channel their Force energy into the central crystal, and it would manifest as a powerful blade. This blade was not ionized plasma, like later blaster bolts and lightsabers, but instead pure Force energy. We actually see similar energy used much later on, projected from the Staff of Ragnos when wielded by Tavion or Dasan.
We've been looking into the shuttle crash, and it doesn't look like laser damage or a mechanical failure was responsible. It's almost as if something just tore apart the engines.
As we can see, this form of energy is not quite the same as the lightsabers we know and love, where Qui-Gon stabs a blast door and we see the door become molten and fall apart. Force energy would be more fundamental, slicing through the door as if it was not even there. The ancient Jedi Order, the precursors to the Jedi and the Sith, would be the first to reverse engineer this technology, and they would use it to defend the Tython system from Rakatan expansion. This technology did not disappear with the fall of the Rakatan Empire. Indeed, it was from pieces of this scattered equipment that the other species of the galaxy would rebuild. They would reverse engineer much of the Rakatan tech, finding ways to make it work without the need for the Force. The hyperdrive is probably the most famous and apparent piece of tech to come from this reverse engineering process, but the lightsaber was no different. People remembered these powerful weapons, the Force Sabers, and they wanted to create similar tools for their own purposes. One of these people was Zim the Despot, a rising, charismatic leader who had conquered the Tion hegemony and the surrounding systems. Zim ruled about 25,000 BBY, and during that time, he was locked in a vicious conflict with another major galactic power, the Hutts. The Hutts, at the time, had a powerful empire of their own, with massive fleets crewed by slave soldiers. Zim was desperate for a way to overcome the defenses of Hutt cities, and eventually, he found one. Zim would hear that the Jedi, a strange and new monastic order from the planet of Ossus, held some ancient secrets of the Force Sabers, secrets that even the secluded monks did not fully understand. He asked them to share these secrets, and when they refused, he stole them, leaving the Jedi bereft of the ability to create any more Force Sabers. Indeed, the Jedi would make finding a means to create a replacement a priority for the Order, and until they did, they returned to the use of Force-forged swords. Zim, meanwhile, would give these ancient secrets to his scientists, who had already proven themselves more than accomplished with things like the infamous war droids of Zim, something that we're going to talk about in a future video. These scientists successfully managed to reverse engineer the technology, creating the first frozen blasters, as they would come to be called. These frozen blasters would be utilized by Zim's army, and they required an enormous amount of power. On top of that, they could only be turned on for a very short period of time before overheating. They were massive things, which Zim utilized as siege weapons to literally carve through the walls of Hutt cities. This tactic was surprisingly effective, and Zim would use it to cut deep into the heart of Hutt space before he was finally stopped. The secret of constructing these weapons was lost with Zim, much the same as the secret of his war droids, and it would not be regained for many centuries. The Jedi would be the ones to unlock the secret again. About 10,000 years later, around 15,000 ABY, they managed to create a feedback loop from a power cell that allowed an energy beam to circle back onto itself, which created the first portable, true lightsabers as we know them. However, these weapons were still highly prone to overheating, and they required enormous amounts of power, which necessitated a power pack that was worn on the belt, which in turn limited the use of the weapon, because there had to be a cable that connected the pack to the belt. Many early lightsaber duels revolved around trying to sever the cable to this power pack and thus deprive a combatant of their weapon. Eventually, however, power packs would shrink in size, allowing the weapons to become fully portable as we know them. This would cause an explosion in the diversity of light weapons, starting, of course, with the iconic lightsaber. But the Jedi and Sith were not the only ones to recognize the utility of such a powerful weapon. The Tian hegemony would actually re-adopt lightsaber technology, and they would repurpose it to their own use, creating a smaller, lighter, one-handed version that is known as the light foil. The light foils would become symbols of nobility with the Tianese aristocrats, who would duel one another at the slightest provocation. Their hilts were often artistically depicted, icons of status that spoke to their owner's wealth. Early Jedi duelists would also create a curved hilt saber to fit their fighting style of Makashi, the same kind of hilt that we see Count Dooku use in the movies. Exar Kun would develop the first double-sided lightsaber during the Sith Wars, again a fairly common variant that was seen on screen in The Phantom Menace, but there were far more esoteric variations than just these. The Guard Shoto, otherwise known as the Light Tonfa, was a Tonfa-style weapon that projected a lightsaber blade from one end. For those who are unaware of what a Tonfa is, think the nightsticks that police used to use, the one with the small handle on it. These weapons were incredibly useful to those who were actually trained in how, and their hilt would often be constructed from a cortosis weave so they could be used in blocking an opponent's blade. A great lightsaber was essentially a great sword, with a much larger and wider blade than a standard saber. The hilt required two hands to use, and it was often favored by larger species. A lightsaber pike was essentially a spear, and offered the advantage of range. There were some variations of the light pike that allowed the handle to extend or compress, which gave it even more versatility in combat. The light whip was a weapon that produced a long, flexible beam of plasma that could be wielded like a whip. It took an extreme level of skill in order to use without injuring oneself, and as such, it was almost exclusively used by Force sensitives. In fact, it would actually be pioneered the most by the clans of Dathomiri Night Sister witches. Some light whips could also contain multiple tendrils, and even tendrils made of metal or other physical material as showcased by the Dark Lady Lumaya. Light axes were also produced, though they were incredibly rare to see. Crossguard sabers were also produced. They emitted a smaller beam at a perpendicular angle to the blade, which allowed a skilled user to protect their hands or even trap the blade of an opponent. The variation on the light weapon is almost endless as it is for normal melee weapons. So you can have a light weapon that can do just about anything. The only real limit is the imagination. Lightsabers are deceptively simple in terms of their internal components. They consist of a power pack, an emitter array, and an internal crystal, all of which is housed within the hilt of the weapon. Most of these parts can be gotten at any market in the galaxy, though the crystal can often be more difficult to procure. We'll talk about that in a bit, but for now understand that what makes a lightsaber work without exploding in the user's hand is the absolute precise alignments required to produce the feedback loop that maintains the blade. These adjustments require either extremely advanced manufacturing processes managed by AI or use of the Force to obtain, which is why the creation of a lightsaber is seen as one of the tests necessary to become a Jedi Knight. The ability to control the Force to such a fine degree and line up those tiny details showcases true mastery. Now, as stated, the crystal can be the most difficult part of a light weapon to obtain. That being said, a surprising diversity of crystals exist that can function as the heart of a lightsaber. The Jedi of the Ruusan era mostly obtained their crystals from Ilum, resulting in the prevalence of blue and green blades. Before that, however, they mostly use Degan crystals. There are literally dozens, perhaps hundreds of different varieties of crystal that can function in a light weapon, and each one produces a different effect in the blade. Some make the blade interfere with electrical components, others make the blade wider or not as deadly. Objects as esoteric as a Krayt Dragon Pearl can function as a light weapon crystal, and oftentimes, a Jedi will rely on the Force to guide them to a crystal that aligns with their own being. Synthetic crystals can also be produced using the proper furnace, though these crystals are almost always red in color. Sith tend to favor these crystals, which led to the association of a red blade with a Sith Lord. This is not a hard rule, however, and there are some Jedi who prefer synthetic crystals, or some Sith who prefer natural crystals for their blade. Light weapons often come with a variety of internal settings, based on the user's preference and how they built it, such as the ability to lower the intensity of the blade to produce a training saber, or a dual-phase switch. A dual-phase switch extends the length of a lightsaber blade at the cost of decreasing its power, but many duelists find this option extremely useful in combat, including Master Corran Horn, a member of Luke's new Jedi Order and maybe the most famous user of a dual-phase weapon. Light weapons are an iconic, almost ubiquitous staple of the Star Wars universe. Where martial artists can be found in that galaxy far, far away, you can be sure that some type of light weapon is not far behind. A light weapon oftentimes reflects the wielder, almost always constructed by a Force sensitive, their creation guided by the Force itself. They can be as variable as the individuals in the galaxy, like I said, which means that you can create almost any type of light weapon you want when you're making your own. Keep that in mind for your own stories and your roleplay. I do hope you found this video interesting and helpful, a little shorter than my normal videos, but don't worry. My next History of the Force, Rise of the Rebellion, is coming soon, and I've been working on lore videos for other properties as well. If you guys enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. It does really help the channel out, and please take care of yourselves out there. As always, may the Force break your chains.